What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. My name is Seth Ashworth, and this week I'm going to be talking about a recently written article in the most recent issue of Kayak Session Magazine, written by Nouria Newman, discussing how rapids are named and the importance behind rapid names, and a couple other things, but we'll give you a bit more of an overview about it in a second. I'm joined today by a special guest, pro kayaker from California, Evan Moore. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, buddy. How are you doing?
Just great, man. Great to have you on. I hope we can get you back in the near future here to do a full-on interview. But for now, we're going to be talking just kind of in response to this article that I read recently that I thought was super interesting and that I kind of wanted to get your 2 cents on. Did you take a quick look at the article?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, first off, what did you think of it?
I thought it was definitely interesting. It made me sit back and actually think about the names of rapids more than I ever have. I actually never really thought of the significance of the name, more of it as just a name of this rapid that we're at or that we're running. And Nouria made a bunch of good points about a bunch of different things of how to name rapids and why rapids are named what they are. But yeah.
So for people who haven't read this article, it's in the most recent Kayak Session, which is issue 68. Nouria Newman, who's like a French pro kayaker who's sick. I really like hanging out with her. She writes a regular column near the back of the magazine every month or every quarter, however much it comes out. If you didn't read it already, I'd highly recommend going and check it out. And as always, Nouria's column is super interesting and always gives an interesting view on things. But basically what she's talking about is the importance and significance of rapid names, if some of them are too sexist or perverse or misogynistic, or what the story is behind them. She specifically relates to a recent trip that she was on with Eric Boomer and Ben Stooksbury in Wyoming, where they ran a river called the Tongue River, and they were trying to name all the rivers, all the rapids related to Tongue, and the same on the Big Goose Creek, I think, is the other one that she talks about. So if you haven't read this article, highly recommend going to check out. And as always, go check out what Nouria is up to. It's super interesting. But basically what she's getting at is there's a lot of rivers around the world with rapid names that are kind of, they're pretty down there. They're pretty down in the depths, and they're not always super palatable. She brings up a bunch of great examples, actually, in your neck of the woods, Evan.
Yep.
A lot of these are in California, I think, like Show Me Your Tits, One in the Stink, Reach Around. I think those are all California-based names.
I don't know about One in the Stink or Reach Around, but Big Boy Pants, Raw Dog, Show Me Your Tits. All those are definitely names in California, and a lot of them are on Fantasy Falls, which is a very uniquely named run. It's, for one, Fantasy Falls the river has nothing to do with that name. It's called the North Fork of the McCallamy. And I'm actually not exactly sure who named all the rapids on that. I've heard a bunch of different names because it was first descended by Royal Robbins and all those guys way back in the day. I'm pretty sure. I'm not exactly 100% sure on that, but also, I think all the names came from the LVM boys, back in the early 90s or mid 90s, where on all those were being named. So, and there's quite a few interesting names on that run, and she referred to a couple of them on that run.
Yeah, now before we get into it here, I'm absolutely not opposed to any of these names. I think if you first descend a rapid, you can call it whatever you want, and I absolutely 100% stand by that. And Nouria's closing comment in this article was that we shouldn't judge rapid names kind of based on our view of things today and what our personal current situation is. That's not relative to how things were at the time when those rapids were first descended. And that's kind of something I wanted to kind of jump off here and get talking to you about, Evan, was it's really interesting how like times change and things that were said at some point were okay and they're not okay now, or vice versa. And obviously, rapid names definitely fall into that column, but it's quite often a topic which seems to just get glossed over, and people are like, oh, this this rapid's called whatever so and so, and there's absolutely no way you could reasonably, if you were doing a first ascent like today, call a gorge "Show me your tits." But at some point in paddling world, that was okay thing. Should we start to think about renaming these rapids because it's not in keeping with today's today's current cultural climate? Or do you think that's disrespectful to the people who originally went down those rapids and did the first ascent and did the work and put the time in and did the things that other people were not prepared to do?
It's a tough with the times that we live in now, and trying to people that came before us and were the first people to do those rapids. It's pretty funny when I think of those rapids, particularly those ones on Fantasy Falls. I don't think of the name in the negative kind of sexist way that they are. It's never even crossed my mind that was a sexist thing, because I don't look at it that way. I look at it as the name of the rapid. And I think that some of those iconic rapids like that are, I just don't know if they could be renamed. I personally probably would never look at that rapid and be able to call it something else. And that's no disrespect to the times that we live in or anything like that. It's just truly the name of the rapid and what it was. But I think going forward, and definitely now you don't see that quite as much with the rapids that are being run today and being first ascended, you don't see those names. But it's definitely something that you need to think about.
Another really interesting point that Nouria brings up in this article that I thought was super interesting, that was almost every first ascent, almost every rapid name has an accompanying story. And we just you've run these rapids a bunch and you don't know all the stories behind how they got to being there. And I wonder if sometimes guidebooks reference it really well, but quite often that information's getting lost. I wonder if we should try and start centralizing a database of this stuff for how rapids came to have the names they have. Because I think a lot of information is getting lost. I don't know how you feel about this, but a lot of information, these stories, and the stories are super interesting. They're as interesting as going down the river as hearing the stories of those first ascents and those people who were doing it. But a lot of information of those stories is kind of getting lost in the ether, right? Especially with the internet and how we're all more connected but less connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are seeing so many things on social media, doing things now, that they are kind of forgetting about what those boys did back in the day. And I think that's a great idea to have, website, something to go and read the stories of those first ascents and all that. Not even necessarily to know how the rapid was named, but there's so much history and knowledge to be gained from what those guys did, 20 years ago on some of these runs, that is just so impressive. And it's a really cool thing about California is there's so much history just within the river community here and all the rivers. And I've been pretty lucky to, be able to meet a lot of those people and have stories with them, and even be on some of those runs that they first ascended, and hear those stories, which are always incredibly interesting, and I really enjoy it. But yeah, I still don't know why a lot of the rapids were named what they were, what it is, and yeah, that's, I guess, the best way to put it.
I mean, so think about this, right? Think back to whatever your local run is, right? I'm going to take the Ottawa as my local run, right?
Yeah.
There are a ton of different features that are named certain names that everyone just says, oh yeah, this feature's called Phil's Hole or whatever. I've paddled that rapid hundreds of times, probably close to thousands of times. I have no idea the story behind why that feature is called that, and I'm sure someone will email me at some point in the future and tell me all about it, and I'm excited to read the email. But I think we get so oblivious, right? We're so switched off to like it's just called what it is because that's what it's called. But I think so much super interesting stories are getting lost, and I wonder what we could be doing as a community to help like mitigate that loss.
Oh, I agree. I think it's going to be, just having to talk to those people that were there when they were named the captain and being the first people to do these legendary runs. That's what it comes down to. That's kind of what history is, and I think that's really the only way to figure out what exactly were they thinking when they named that rapid or on this run is to talk to those people.
All right, so let's take it the other way for a second. There's Nouria discusses a bunch of other names of rapids that are like kind of obvious based on how the rapid is, and one great example is like S-Bend Rapid in Mexico, right? Like on El Seco on roadside, and it's kind of an S-shaped bend into a little straightaway canyon. Super sick run. Should we be renaming the ones which don't have cool names?
It's pretty funny how many double drops or triple drops or S-turns or, whatever named rapid there are in the world. And it does make it confusing. And, I think if a rapid is that name and people know it by that name, then it should stay that name. For many reasons. One, for safety reasons. If you start, beta gets lost in between naming rapids differently and changing the name of rapids. There could be someone on a run and they're coming up on the double drop and you name it something else, and then they have no idea what you're talking about anymore. So I think that's one issue that I could see if we started renaming those rapids, generic named rapids like that. But yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, the reason I bring this topic up is because like the Ottawa has been like, I'm going to use this Ottawa example again because recently I've been paddling with a couple of Ottawa vets who have been coming up with kind of entertaining renames for some of the classic rapids on the run, and some of the entertaining renames are actually a lot more like on point with how it feels when you go down the rapid. Yeah. Like, so the example I give is like the Norman's Rapid is kind of like halfway down the run. It's like kind of narrows down, and there's a bunch of offset diagonal waves and a couple of holes and some swirly whirly water, and a couple of small other features. And so instead of calling it the Norman's Rapid, which I think is related to a landowner or like a previous landowner of the area, we've been calling it Snakes and Ladders, because you kind of like, you can zip across these like little reactionary waves like they're ladders, and you can zip back up them and do attaining moves. But if you make a mistake, you'll go into like the swirly water, and that's like hitting playing the game Snakes and Ladders, like where the snake takes you all the way down to the bottom, and then at the end of the rapid, it's all the water's kind of like swirly and weird, and we call that the snake pit. It's like where you end up if you made a mistake.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
It's tons more entertaining, and I really like the name, but I'm not 100% sure that it will be able to roll it out, because it's like everyone's kind of already set in their ways on one name that doesn't make sense. It's just a name, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty funny. We had this problem when we were running the cataracts of the Kern at ridiculous high flows in 2017. We actually ended up renaming a lot of those rapids at the higher flows because it was just completely a different run than it is at the the normal flows. So, and we had quite a few people actually come back on us for renaming some of the rapids. But for us, it was like, well, this is, a complete different river at these flows than it was previously run before. So we felt that, we were basically first descending a whole new river. So we felt that we had the right to rename some of these things once the river gets up to that flow, which is a little different on the Ottawa. There's so many people that are doing that section all the time that it might be harder to try to convince people to rename it, because it is so stuck and engraved that say, yeah, like Norman's, that is the Norman's Rapid, even though we don't really know why it's named that, or landowner or whatever. But we definitely got some pushback when we started to try to rename some things. But I think at the
When
end
you
of the
say,
day,
sorry, keep
yeah,
going.
go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
you finish what you're saying, man. Finish what you're saying.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's just, it is a tough thing to rename. And we definitely got pushback for it, but we also, I think, were able to, put in that it was a completely different run. So I think that's where we come in a little differently with that. But yeah.
When you say pushback, do you mean like physically in person, like at the put in, people were like, yo, bro, what the hell? Or do you mean like you're getting emails and messages via your email or Instagram, whatever?
I mean, both, but definitely even confronted in person about changing the names of rapids. And it was friendly, there was no one that was seriously pissed off about it. But people coming up to us, like, that rabbit's named Bolt Route, not Fluffy Pillow or whatever, whatever the names would be. But there's definitely a few that we changed, and people definitely did not agree with it 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting that you were getting these, like, even like a friendly interaction where someone's like, hey, that's not the name. Like, it means people care enough that they want to interact with you about it. Like, if the way I like if someone has time in their day to like say something to you, it's like that's time they could have been doing something else. So it must be important to them that they want to take the time to like engage you in that conversation. How did you play those out? Like, what were the outcomes of those? Were they all just friendly, like, oh hey, that's actually called this, and you're an idiot, or like, did anyone get anything different to that?
I mean, there was definitely a little pushback. It was mainly the generation that was before us that was the pushback, and I don't know if it was a little bit of animosity or what. They were just looking for some reason to push back on us. I'm not sure, and I don't want to start any sort of drama or anything, but it was friendly. It was over a beer at the brewery or something like that, so it was definitely nothing serious. But like you said, people do take those names seriously, so it's something you got to think about.
So just coming back to something you just said a minute ago, like, how high do you think it has to be before it's acceptable to start renaming the rapids?
Well, the magic number that we kind of came up with for, in particular, the cataracts of the Kern was that 4,000 CFS range. And before we had done it at 4,000, the next descent was about 2,800 or something. So it was significantly higher in a completely different river. Which that was always an argument coming back when people confronted me about changing. I was like, well, it's a completely different river, and we were at the time the only people that had ever been down there. So we felt like we had the right to name it what it was. And I'd also come back, you could call it whatever you want, but we're going to call it this. This is how we're going about it, and this is how we're identifying our landmarks on the river to make sure that we know where we are and know exactly a game plan. But we also had to get other people involved in the name changes too. Like, had my dad involved, who was always, a phone call away if anything went wrong down there. And that's one thing that's really nice about the cataracts is it's close enough to Kernville that if something were to happen, that we could get of help immediately, just about. But it was also, we had to definitely spread the names more than just to the people that were on the water, for many reasons. So, and I think that would be where some of the pushback came back from too. So,
and you didn't have to change the names of any of the like access points or put in take out points or like emergency evacuation routes of the river.
No, but we did. We ended up breaking down different sections of the cataracts because it was about a 15-mile section, which is the true whole cataracts, and we actually never paddled from the beginning to the end in one go in one day. We never could. It was just too stout. We always, and it's roadside, so we'd always pick off a section and then out and then call it quits for the day and go back and do another section the next day. So we did actually changed some of the access point names. The upper section of the cataracts has always been called the Cadillacs, and we kept that name. And then basically there's a big rapid that ends the Cadillacs called Toilet Bowl, and then there's a section below Toilet Bowl that we called the warm-ups, which was kind of a name that might have not been appropriate in underselling how hard it was, but it was the easiest section of the entire section of the cataracts, if that makes sense. And we call it the warm-ups, and luckily there was no one that was going down there thinking it was a piece of cake, because we call it the warm-ups. But that was definitely one thing, looking back, hindsight, that I would be worried about. Definitely still class 5 plus, huge whitewater. So maybe we shouldn't have called that the warm-ups. And then we changed a few other sections names. I mean, changing section names, it was more just adding sections because we weren't doing the whole thing at one time. Does that make sense?
So yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So
Yep.
For that, let's keep going with this example, because I think it's really great that we're kind of contextually talking about this. You were paddling mostly like yourself. Who else was with you? Johnny Chase, Alec Voorhees, usual suspects. Like what's your crew here? Give us the rundown.
Yep. So when we were first doing it, the first day on the water down there was myself, Johnny Chase, and Tad Dennis, and that was the
beast. The guy is such a savage. Oh my god.
Yeah, he's one of the best kayakers, sea-oneers, whatever. Put him in a plastic boat, he's one of the best in the world. It does not matter what he's doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was us three, and we were kind of the ones that pioneered that first month down there. We were the ones that did every section first, and then Alec came aboard after he got out of school and things like that, and more people joined. But definitely looking back on it now, it was Johnny, Tad, and I were the kind of the pioneers of the cataracts at those flows.
Now here's the next thing: did the three of you work together to rename those, or did whoever was like first get the naming rights?
So we actually came up with it together. It was a team effort, the whole thing. Every single part of it had to be a team effort because it was so hard and so challenging. And every day going out there was such a team sport. I've never felt like kayaking was more of a team sport than paddling the cataracts with those two during that time, because we were, I had done the cataracts plenty before that, and so had Johnny, but it was just at way lower flows. So luckily we knew, we knew where we were. We knew where we were on the river. And a major highway runs literally right next to the river. It's roadside as can be. So you have these landmarks and stuff, but figuring out the rapids itself was such a team effort. And if anything were to go wrong, if someone were to swim, it was such a team effort. So we were always doing that as a team, and that came with naming and all that. So.
And that kind of brings me back to something we were talking about earlier about having like kind of a stories database, because for that example you've given here, like kayaking's a team sport. Like there's no, like if you're doing a first ascent of something, like it's not just one person out there, it's a bunch of you. Like one person will be first for sure, but like it takes everybody to make that happen. And I'm super interested to hear if back in the day those the older crews that were doing those first ascents and naming those rapids were kind of doing team naming rights, or if whoever was first was like, this is what we're calling it and that's that. But I guess we will never know unless someone starts a sick database of stories to collect up.
Yeah, definitely. I've talked to Scott Lindgren a lot. We're really close, and we both live in California and paddle together a lot. And they definitely were a team. That core group of people that he had, Scott and Willie Kern and the Knapp brothers, and they were tight knit, and they worked together on a lot of stuff they were doing. So I can't answer your question exactly on the naming things, but I know that they were as much of a team as any crew that I've ever heard of. So
as a segue to this, I'm so friggin' excited for Rush's new movie about Scott Lindgren. Like, that is going to be the sickest kayaking documentary I think that's maybe ever been made.
I think you could even go further than saying one of the sickest kayaking documentaries. I think it's just going to be one of the greatest action sports documentaries ever made. I've been lucky to, talk to both of them about the film, and they're putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. And, those two, with the background they have on filmmaking and kayaking, just putting that much effort and energy into it, it's going to be incredible.
Yeah, that's I'm so pumped about that. I can't wait to see that and then do another podcast about it. Let's get back on topic here for our naming rapids thing and kind of talk about Nouria's article. What strategies can people employ if they get to a rapid and they do not agree with the name so much they cannot say it?
Man, that's a tough one. I haven't been in, a ton of situations to where we haven't completely agreed on a name. To be completely honest, the biggest thing that we've had a problem with naming is trying to come up with a team name between Johnny, Carson, Alec, and I. So that's a funny thing, but we just cannot come up with it.
I thought you guys were called Team Ice Cream. Like, I thought this was kind of decided.
No, that is just Johnny Chase and Nouria. That is their own team. So yeah, but anyways, back on topic. Yeah, I personally, if I was in that situation where we couldn't come up with a name, I have no idea. I'd just probably call it like the No Name Rapid or something.
My actual question was here, and I'm going to use an example in Mexico on Upper Jalacingo. Okay. Like the last big rapid is called Bukkake, which is a word from pornography. Yeah. And it's a lot of people actually have started using a different name to this. What do you think is the correct response if you get to a rapid and you're just like, I am super uncomfortable with saying the name of this rapid? Should they rename it? What should they do? Give me the lowdown.
Yeah, I mean, if you're personally not comfortable with the name of that rapid, then gosh, you can call it whatever you want. That's not gonna upset me. If that's something that's offending you or whatever, then call it what you want to call it. Come up with another name. I think that's the time that we live in. You could call it whatever you want. And I don't think I think you're right. That rapid on the Upper Jalacingo is controversial for sure. And yeah, I think you can call that thing whatever you want. Yeah, that's kind of my stance on it. I don't think it's disrespectful to the person that ran it first, just because the name it's a disrespectful name to begin with. So I don't think that the person that named it would be that upset if you are calling it something else.
And it's it's, to me, like, I would rather, if you are so uncomfortable with the name, if it offends you so much, I would rather you just describe what the rapid looks like rather than try and come up with a different name.
There you go.
Yeah. And I guess that sounds stupid, but it's like if you've gone to the hard work of doing a first ascent, and almost every single first ascent, I bet like 99.5% of all first ascents are a lot of friggin' work and usually a lot of suffering and time spent without food or in the jungle or like getting bitten by bugs or just having a bad time. Like, you're having a bad time to do a good thing for a lot of people. Yeah. I think if you named a rapid first, you should either stick to that name or just give a description of the rapid. And I don't think there should be an intermediary name. That's my 2 cents. Like, I think if you start to rename things all the time, something you brought up, which is like it gets difficult for safety, but I think it's kind of it's kind of like a middle finger to those people who did the work before you, who found a good put-in that you use and found a good takeout that you're going to use and found a way down, and this page has been passed from like people to people to people. Like, it's kind of a middle finger to those people who did the work to start like renaming all the rapids.
And I agree with that. I don't think that you should rename, you could go into a run and just start calling it whatever you want. You know, I don't think that I could
Yeah, I
go
mean,
and
follow your heart for sure. Do what makes you happy. But if you really, really can't say it, just give a description of the rapid, man. Move on.
yeah, and I agree with that as well. And you know, going back to my point about if you really are that upset with the name, you know, you could call it something else within the group you're on the water with, you say, but like I said, for safety reasons, that's the biggest concern I see is when you start renaming rapids, is that people would not know where you're talking about. Say, you know, you change a rapid and there's a new piece of wood or something in that rapid, and you're saying, you know, whatever, Double Drop has a piece of wood in it when it's really called Big Boy Pants, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
That's my biggest concern with renaming all the rapids for sure. And if you know
For sure.
if yeah, and if you have your group of people that you're paddling with on board with calling it that within your group, then that's fine to me, you know. But just don't bring any sort of hazardous things that could happen by renaming a rapid into the entire world of kayaking, because I could just see problems definitely rising from that.
Preach. I think that's, I agree with you 100% there, Evan. I think it's interesting that we've been talking about this one-page article for like almost half an hour. Like it's such a short article, but there's so much more. There's like how net rapids are named and like the stories behind them is so important, and it's such a big part of our culture that it's, I guess, like not obvious until you start really looking into it, and then it's like you realize how much of a big deal it is.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it's crazy, and it's, you know, it's hard that we can't. There's like no black and white. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just like these are the things that you and I think, and I'm sure other people have other opinions on this same topic.
Yeah, I'm sure. And it's pretty funny. Like I said at the beginning of this, I really haven't put that much thought into the significance of the names of the rapids. You know, I definitely will think, wow, that's a great name for a rapid or something like that. But thinking of the actual significance of it is something that, you know, I really just haven't thought of. And that's pretty wild for, you know, someone that paddles as much as I do and does as many rivers to think about that and not think of the significance of the names. So I know there's other people out there that for sure, you know, feel the same way that I do.
And that's the takeaway I'm getting. Really, the more I've thought about this, the more we've talked about it, the more I'm like, I would love for someone. It's not going to be me. I'm not like web savvy enough. I just don't think I have time. But I would love for someone to start collecting those stories, or at least putting somewhere on the internet where we can all start centralizing these stories, because I think there's so much getting lost, and there's like that older generation, like I think especially in California, that generation of people who are doing those first ascents are like starting to get older, and you know their times their memory is going to start fading, and those like really bright memories that they would have had as like, you know, teenagers and 20-year-olds doing first ascents are going to start fading, and important details of their stories are going to start getting lost. And I would love to get that somewhere for everyone before that happens, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And you know, some of that's already happening. You know, the Royal Robbins did so many of the first ascents in California. You know, he did the big three, which is the, you know, the headwaters of the Kern, the Middle Fork of the Kings, and Devil's Postpile on the Middle Fork of the San Joaquin. Those are three, you know, iconic High Sierra runs that he did back in the 80s. And, you know, he's not around anymore to be able to tell you the reason that they named those rapids that or what. So there's just, yeah, there's a ton of interesting things that need to be talked about before that history is just gone, because it has not been written down or spoken enough about, and it's very interesting for sure.
Yeah, I hope that we can wind this podcast down by asking anyone on the internet who has time and inclination and is as passionate about it as we are, or as probably all kayakers are, if you actually stop and really think about it, that someone will start a database for all these first ascent stories, so we can get to the bottom of why a river is called a river, or why a rapid's called a rapid, sorry, on any given river. I really hope that someone out there in the future can help us with that, but it definitely, the more we talk, the less clear I am on what's right and what's wrong. And the interesting thing Nouria kind of comes up with at the end of her thing is that there's so much we don't know, and we can't make any value judgments based on how we are right now, you know, in the culture we live in right now. So I hope this is a discussion more people can start to have, and I think we've got a lot. You know, this has been a good diving board for a lot of people to start talking more about why things are called things. You know.
Yeah, agreed. And just want to give a shout out to Nouria for how well written that article is. You know, she's extremely intelligent, and it shows in that article. And I'm glad that she's starting this conversation because I think it's a cool one.
Yeah, agree 100%. Evan, we're going to wind it down here. Where can people find you if they're interested in hearing more about you? What's your Instagram? Give us your YouTube, Facebook, etc.
Yeah, Instagram is Evan with 2 N's more, and then Facebook is Evan Moore Kayak, and YouTube is Evan Moore Kayak.
Right on. Okay, well, this has been Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you can take this debate on what's important about a name back into your kind of friend group and kayak group, and let us know some of your thoughts. If you loved hearing more of this, if you love this podcast and want to hear more of it, please consider supporting on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. And hopefully I will see you in the very near future. Peace.